Hey there, Speedy Readers. Thanks for joining me again for another episode of Northern Lights by Phillip Pullman. Now, last time we got up to the point where Roger is missing, page 62. So let's see what Lyra does about it. I've got the stopwatch on the go, so 15 minutes exactly of reading. Here we go. The evening sky was awash with peach apricot cream, tender little ice cream clouds in a wide orange sky. The spires and towers of Oxford stood around them, level but no higher. The green woods of Chateau Vert and Whiteham rose on either side to the east and west. Rooks were cawing somewhere, and bells were ringing, and from the ox pens the steady beat of a gas engine announced the ascent of the evening Royal Mail Zeppelin for London. Lyra watched it climb away beyond the spire of St Michael's Chapel, as big at first as the tip of her little finger when she held it at arm's length, and then steadily smaller until it was a dot in the pearly sky. She turned and looked down into the shadowed quadrangle, where the black-gowned figures of the scholars were already beginning to drift in ones and twos towards the buttery, their demons strutting or fluttering alongside, or perching calmly on their shoulders. The lights were going on in the hall. She could see the stained glass windows gradually beginning to glow as a servant moved up the tables, lighting the naphtha lamps. The steward's bell began to toll, announcing half an hour before dinner. This was her world. She wanted it to stay the same forever and ever, but it was changing around her, for someone out there was stealing children. She sat on the roof ridge, chin in hands. "We better rescue him, Pan," she said. He answered in his rook voice from the chimney. "It'll be dangerous," he said. "Course, I know that. Remember what they said in the retiring room." "What? Something about a child up in the Arctic? The one that wasn't attracting dust?" "They said it was an entire child. What about it? That might be what they're going to do to Roger, and the Gyptians and the other kids." "What?" "Well, what does entire mean?" "Dunno. They cut them in half, probably. I reckon they make slaves out of them. That'd be more use. They probably got mines up there, uranium mines for atom craft. I bet that's what it is. And if they sent grown-ups down the mine, they'd be dead, so they use kids instead because they cost less. That's what they've done with him." "I think..." But what Pan thought had to wait, because someone began to shout from below. "Lyra! Lyra! You come in this instant!" There was a banging on the window frame. Lyra knew the voice and the impatience. It was Mr. Lonsdale, the housekeeper. There was no Mrs. Lonsdale, the housekeeper. There was no hiding from her. Tight-faced, Lyra slid down the roof and into the gutter, and then climbed in through the window again. Mrs. Lonsdale was running some water into the little chip basin, to the accompaniment of a great groaning and hammering from the pipes. "The number of times you've been told about going out there. Look at you. Just look at your skirt. It's filthy. Take it off at once and wash yourself while I look for something decent that ain't torn. Why can't you keep yourself clean and tidy?" Lyra was too sulky even to ask why she was having to wash and dress, and no grown-up ever gave reasons of their own accord. She dragged the dress over her head and dropped it on the narrow bed and began to wash desultorily. There's a word to look up. While Pan, a canary now, hopped closer and closer to Mrs. Lonsdale's demon, a stolid retriever, trying in vain to annoy him. "Look at the state of this wardrobe. You ain't hung nothing up for weeks. Look at the creases in this. Look at this, look at that." Lyra didn't want to look. She shut her eyes as she rubbed at her face with the thin towel. "Oh, you'll just have to wear it as it is. There ain't time to take an iron to it. God bless me, girl. Your knees. Look at the state of them." "Don't want to look at nothing," Lyra muttered. Mrs. Lonsdale smacked her leg. "Wash," she said ferociously. "You'll get all that dirt off." "Why?" Lyra said at last. "I never wash my knees usually. No one's going to look at my knees. What have I got to do all this for? You don't care about Roger neither any more than Chef does. I'm the only one that..." Another smack on the leg. "None of that nonsense. I'm a Parslow, same as Roger's father. He's my second cousin. I bet you didn't know that, because I bet you never asked, Miss Lyra. I bet it never occurred to you. Don't you chide me about not caring about the boy. God knows I even care about you, and you give me a little enough reason, and no thanks." She seized the flannel and rubbed Lyra's knees so hard she left the skin bright pink and sore, but clean. "The reason for this is you're going to have dinner with the master and his guests. I hope to God you behave. Speak when you're spoken to, be quiet and polite, smile nicely, and don't you ever say dunno when someone asks you a question. She dragged the best dress onto Lyra's skinny frame, tugged it straight, fished a bit of red ribbon out of the tangle in a drawer, and brushed Lyra's hair with a coarse brush. If they'd let me know earlier, I could have given your hair a proper wash. Well, that's too bad. As long as they don't look too close. There. Now, stand up straight. Where's those best patent leather shoes? 5 minutes later, Lyra was knocking on the door of the master's lodging, the grand and slightly gloomy house that opened into the Yaxley quadrangle and backed onto the library garden. Pan, an ermine now for politeness, rubbed himself against her leg. The door was opened by the master's manservant, Cousins, an old enemy of Lyra's, but both knew that this was a state of truce. Mrs. Lonsdale said I was to come, said Lyra. Yes, said Cousins, stepping aside. The master's in the drawing-room. He showed her into the large room that overlooked the library garden. The last of the sun shone into it, through the gap between the library and Palmer's Tower, and lit up heavy pictures and the glum silver the master collected. It also lit up the guests, and Lyra realised why they weren't going to dine in the hall. 3 of the guests were women. Ah, Lyra, said the master. I'm so glad you could come. Cousins, could you find some sort of soft drink? Dame Hannah, I don't think you've met Lyra, Lord Asriel's niece, you know. Dame Hannah Relf was the head of one of the women's colleges, an elderly grey-haired lady whose demon was a marmoset. Lyra shook hands as politely as she could and was then introduced to the other guests, who were, like Dame Hannah, scholars from other colleges and quite uninteresting. Then the master came to the final guest. Mrs. Coulter, he said, this is our Lyra. Lyra, come and say hello to Mrs. Coulter. Hello, Lyra, said Mrs. Coulter. She was beautiful and young. Her sleek fair hair framed her cheeks, and her demon was a golden monkey. Awkward. But Lyra doesn't know that, does she? Okay. Things are going to get interesting, I think. So, chapter 4, we've made it, and this is called the alethiometer. Okay. I hope you'll sit next to me at dinner, said Mrs. Coulter, making room for Lyra on the sofa. I'm not used to the grandeur of a master's lodging. You'll have to show me which knife and fork to use. Are you a female scholar? Said Lyra. She regarded female scholars with a proper Georgian disdain. There were such people, but, poor things, they could never be taken more seriously than animals dressed up and acting in a play. Mrs. Coulter, on the other hand, was not like any female scholar Lyra had seen, and certainly not like the 2 serious elderly ladies who were other female guests. Lyra had asked the question, expecting the answer no. In fact, for Mrs. Coulter had such an air of glamour that Lyra was entranced. She could hardly take her eyes off her. Not really, Mrs. Coulter said. I'm a member of Dame Hannah's college, but most of my work takes place outside Oxford. Tell me about yourself, Lyra. Have you always lived at Jordan College? Within 5 minutes, Lyra had told her everything about her half-wild life, her favourite routes over the rooftops, the battle of the clay beds, the time she and Roger had caught and roasted a rook, her intention to capture a narrow boat from the Gyptians and sail it to Abingdon, and so on. She even, looking around and lowering her voice, told her about the trick she and Roger had played on the skulls in the crypt. And these ghosts came right... They came to my bedroom without their heads. They couldn't talk except for making sort of gurgling noises, but I knew what they wanted all right. So I went down the next day and put the coins back. They'd probably have killed me else. You're not afraid of danger then, said Mrs. Coulter admiringly. They were at dinner by this time, and Mrs. Coulter had hoped, sitting next to each other. I'm missing a very important word here, which makes the sentence make sense. They were at dinner by this time, and as Mrs. Coulter had hoped, sitting next to each other. Lyra ignored completely the librarian on her other side and spent the whole meal talking to Mrs. Coulter. When the ladies withdrew for coffee, Dame Hannah said, Tell me, Lyra, are they going to send you to a school? Lyra looked blank. I don't know, she said. Probably not, she added for safety. I wouldn't want to put them to any trouble, she went on piously. Or expense. It's probably better if I just go on living at Jordan and get educated by scholars here when they've got a bit of a spare time. Being as they're always here already, they're probably free. "And does your uncle, Lord Asriel, have any plans for you?" said the other lady, who was a scholar and at the other woman's college. Lost my place. "Yes," said Lyra. "I expect so. Not school, though. He's going to take me to the north next time he comes." "I remember him telling me," said Mrs. Coulter. Lyra blinked. The two female scholars sat up very slightly, though their demons, either well-behaved or torpid, did no more than flick their eyes at each other. "I met him at the Royal Arctic Institute," Mrs. Coulter went on. "As a matter of fact, it's partly because of that meeting that I'm here today." "Are you an explorer too?" said Lyra. "In a kind of way. I've been to the north several times. Last year I spent 3 months in Greenland making observations of the aurora." That was it. Nothing and no one else existed now for Lyra. She gazed at Mrs. Coulter with awe and listened, rapt and silent, to her tales of igloo building, of seal hunting, of negotiating with the Lapland witches. The two female scholars had nothing so exciting to tell, and sat in silence until the men came in. Later, when the guests were preparing to leave, the master said, "Stay behind, Lyra. I'd like to talk to you for a minute or two. Go to my study, child, sit down there and wait for me." Puzzled, tired, exhilarated, Lyra did as she was told. Cousins, the manservant, showed her in and pointedly left the door open so that he could see what she was up to from the hall, where he was helping people on with their coats. Lyra watched for Mrs. Coulter, but she didn't see her, and then the master came into the study and shut the door. He sat down heavily in the armchair by the fireplace. His demon flapped up to the chair back and sat by his head. Her old hooded eyes on Lyra. The lamp hissed gently as the master said, "So, Lyra, you've been talking to Mrs. Coulter. Did you enjoy hearing what she said?" "Yes." "She is a remarkable lady." "She's wonderful. She's the most wonderful person I've ever met." The master sighed. In his black suit and black tie, he looked as much like his demon as anyone could. And suddenly, Lyra thought that one day, quite soon, he would be buried in the crypt under the oratory, and an artist would engrave a picture of his demon on the brass plate for his coffin, and her name would share the space with his. "I should have made time before now for a talk with you, Lyra," he said after a few moments. "I was intending to do so at any case, but it seems the time is further on than I thought. You have been safe here in Jordan, my dear. I think you have been happy. You haven't found it easy to obey us, but we are very fond of you, and you've never been a bad child. There's a lot of goodness and sweetness in your nature, and a lot of determination. You're going to need all of that. Things are going on in the wide world, and I would have liked to protect you. Things are going on in the wide world. I would have liked to protect you from, by keeping you here in Jordan, I mean, but that's no longer possible." She merely stared. Were they going to send her away? "You knew that sometime you'd have to go to school," the master went on. "We have taught you some things here, but not well or systematically. Our knowledge is of a different kind. You need to know things that elderly men are not able to teach you, especially at the age you are now. You must have been aware of that. You're not a servant's child either. We couldn't put you out to be fostered by a town family. They might have cared for you in some ways, but your needs are different. You see, what I'm saying to you, Lyra, is that part of your life that belongs to Jordan College is now coming to an end." "No," she said. "No, I don't want to leave Jordan. I like it here. I want to stay here forever." "When you're young, you do think that things last forever. Unfortunately, they don't, Lyra. It won't be long, a couple of years at most, before you will be a young woman and not a child anymore. A young lady. And believe me, you'll find Jordan College a far from easy place to live then." "But it's my home." "It has been your home, but now you need something else. Not school. I'm not going to school. You need female company, female guidance." The word female only suggested female scholars to Lyra, and she involuntarily made a face. To be exiled from the grandeur of Jordan, the splendour and fame of its scholarship, to a dingy brick-built boarding house of a college at the northern end of Oxford with dowdy female scholars who smelt of cabbage and mothballs like those two at dinner. The master saw her expression and saw Pan's polecat eyes flash red. He said, "But suppose it was Mrs. Coulter." Instantly, Pan's fur changed from coarse brown to downy white. Lyra's eyes widened. "Really? She is by way of being acquainted with Lord Asriel. She is by way of being... Oh, I don't... Really? She is by way of being acquainted with Lord Asriel. I'm not quite sure.
Hello, Mr. Faulks. Follow the road, thank you.
And on that speed bump, we are going to have to hold it there because it's time for me to go, 15 minutes. And, well, is she going to go and live with Mrs. Coulter? Oh, it's all going on. It's all kicking off. Stop it. Make it stop. I do wonder, and I will make a mark there. I'll have to come back to it next time, see what she chooses. Is she going to go and live with Mrs. Coulter? Let's find out. All right, but I've got to go, so I'll see you soon for another Speedy read. Bye-bye.
Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that will spread like disease through our minds. Soon we'll have